Did it happen to you to walk by a restaurant or a plaza when you travel or in your own town and get a notification from your smartphone saying something like, "How did you enjoy this place?" Or, "By the way, you could also visit the place you are in front of." Sometimes I find this useful, and other times, though, I find this unsolicited advice disturbing. So, my next thought is, how do I switch this off? That is not longer possible without losing some other capabilities like a location on the map. So for the most part, we are given a trade-off. But as long as the decision is in my hand as a customer, I'm okay with it. Bill Gates said, I tackle every big new problem by asking two questions. Who has dealt with it before and well, and what can I learn from them? My education and experience are as a modeler or data scientist. For several years, I've been working in creating risk governance for models and user computing tools and for advanced analytics. I hope to share with you some of my experience in leading a risk governance function and hope to learn something too. With great power comes great responsibility, and this applies to the artificial intelligence and its usage. Establishing confidence and trust when adopting artificial intelligence is not a trivial pursuit, and risk governance has a role to play. This session will talk about the efforts and considerations that should be taken when creating appropriate risk governance for safe AI usage. There are three parts of this presentation, really: setting the stage with definitions, identifying the risks, and then exploring risk mitigation techniques. What's AI? AI definition is not trivial. Enough to talk to three people, each has their own understanding of AI or machine learning definition, or they confuse the two. Or search the web and you will see again many ways to define it. Here is a plot with references from several reliable sources, think tanks and regulators. Some of the words here are what is getting developed and used in the financial industry. That is a spectrum of advanced algorithms applies to big data to get insight, identify patterns, describe, or predict. Very close to models, but more complex with more data. Then the AI shifts from models where those algorithms get into learning, produce outcomes which we cannot easily explain, make decisions without human intervention. One definition which I found appealing is right here, is machines that replicate human intelligence, mimic their action. And there are three types of artificial intelligence: narrow or weak, general or strong, and artificial superintelligence. Narrow AI is close to advanced modeling, and this is what I'm going to talk about. Now let's turn around risk governance. What's risk governance? Risk governance refers to the functions, rules, processes, mechanisms by which decisions about risks are taken and implemented. It can be both prescriptive but also with positive outcomes because analyzes the risks and formulates a risk management approach to avoid or reduce those risks under extreme events. Why the two together? So let's take a step back. AI is the fourth industrial revolution, according to some. We evolve as individuals, as society, as businesses. If we look at our past, we have evolved significantly from an abacus to a personal computer. Each growth stage allowed us to do more, faster, better. In the same time, our level of control decreased, our level of reliance increased. Today, as users, we don't need to know the ins and outs of the Microsoft Office or how data is organized in various platforms, or we don't want to know anything about how the iPhone is built. We rely on because we gained the trust. And we trust that somebody else knows what is behind. The growth stage in AI that we are living is about trust too, but trust must be earned. and must be specific. What we trust, when we trust, in what degree, and when. As our organizations deploy AI to help achieve our business objectives, we should have a good understanding of how AI operates, what can go wrong, and what actions should be taken to prevent or mitigate such adverse consequences. That's why we need some governance around AI. That is to gain the trust of our clients, of our management, of our stakeholders at large. AI risks vary. For individuals, risk range from fairness concerns, so they are treated fairly without bias, to privacy concerns, that data is not misused, security, they are afraid of identity theft, and to physical safety, as for self-driving cars. Organizations are concerned more about reputation, image deterioration, legal and compliance losses and fines, poor business results. The society has different concerns. They refer to infrastructure that is in large part automated, so controlled by some machines. Security, such as exposure to cyber attacks. Stability, economical and political, can be threatened by election manipulations through AI applications. The context also plays a role. Currently, AIs are used for many purposes in different areas, in different fields. Virtual assistants or chatbots are used extensively in retail, in telecom, in financial industry. Robotics and RPAs are used again in manufacturing, financial industry, and elsewhere. Image and natural processing are used in telecom and financial industry. For robotics, the manufacturing could be concerned with the safety of the humans in the production loop and of the customers. It is an alignment between the three parties, the society, the individuals, and the company. On the other hand, the virtual assistant can cause losses if not operating properly, so it's mainly a concern for the companies using such AI and not for their clients. As organizations, we are seeing first what harms our business objectives. However, we try to account for stakeholders' concerns. Okay. We have not forgotten about our core expertise in model risk management and used it to frame new AI concepts. So starting from models, there is the SR 1170CC guidance on how to manage model risk. There, a model is defined as a quantitative method system approach that applies a variety of techniques and assumptions to process data into quantitative estimates. A model contains an input component, which is really the data and assumptions, and then a processing component, which is the algorithm that takes the data and produces the output, the estimates. I say the model is deployed in a system, in a platform where it's used, so the system is also a determinant aspect of the model. The model risk is defined as the risk of adverse consequences due to misspecification or misuse of models. Model risk increases with complexity, with uncertainty of the inputs, with broader use, larger impact. The model risk is managed through its life cycle. And model validation is a key risk mitigant in that life cycle. Now, what else do we need to add here to make it relevant for AI? Artificial intelligence uses a variety of algorithms, statistical, mathematical concepts. They process data and in large degree are expected to qualify as models. We can easily say that the AI risk is the risk of adverse consequences due to misspecification or misuse. The system where AI is deployed becomes critical for the AI soundness, maybe more critical than for other models. AI is at the border of technology and software, data and privacy, models and analytics. And when it comes to model risk governance in many financial institutions, the model risk teams took the initiative to look into the AI risk. And that's not because that AI doesn't have other risks like technology risk, the risk of poorly implementing per specifications, or the privacy risk, the risk of using data for unintended purposes, but also because we are concerned about the design and the evolution, the learning when exploring that the AI operates as intended. The advantage is that the model risk has been under intense regulatory scrutiny and matured in identifying risk, finding remedies, and prescribing those to mitigate risk. They have also formed a model risk approval committee where businesses, modelers, and risk professionals come together and discuss, review, and approve models that can be leveraged upon. To understand further where the AI-specific risks raise from, let's take another look at ins and outs of the AI. There are some new aspects. Big data brings higher data input risk, concerns significant concerns around data privacy and use of data provided by third parties, as the data ownership and due diligence is expected to take place at the data entry point, which may not be now. Powerful system brings a more higher risk exposure to cloud environment, bigger attraction for cyber attacks, as there is a wealth of information available there. More advanced algorithms are used, and that complexity reduces significantly the transparency, the understanding of how AI operates, how the results are obtained. So more prone to error or misuse, more difficult to understand where things go wrong. The output user risk is highly increased because everything is more complex, lack of transparency, lack of understanding of results, or understanding of limitations that the AI might have. In general, privacy, third-party processing risk are everywhere in these components that define an AI. However, the critics may have a point. The current model risk management guideline may not be specific enough, and the validation guidelines are definitely not specific enough when it comes to privacy, high dependency on data, processing risk, bias, and lack of transparency. Let's see how these identified gaps can be approached through risk governance. As I said, the suggestion is to start the model risk governance and expand to a multidisciplinary team to other aspects such as security and cyber, privacy, and third-party risk. As AI is pervasively used from RPA to client interaction within the FI, an enterprise-wide effort is necessary to bring together all the individuals that can identify the risk, understand how they vary from use case to use case, find appropriate nuanced mitigation approaches. Gaining trust is to tackle directly the societal concerns. If we get AI to help in our job, then we need to remain involved in the loop, but also to ensure that our extended selves behave in accordance with some principles. Therefore, we need to set principles. Then one size does not fit all when it comes to risk governance. Not all risk is 100% mitigated, but those that are most critical. An RPA to help sort back office emails may have less risk than an AI model that automates and decides if individuals are approved for loans, as it directly impacts those individuals. And therefore, we need a risk-based approach. The AI also has a life cycle as a model, and at minimum, it is built using a production environment, updated or retrained, and then retired from usage. At each stage, there are risks, but their levels vary. Traditionally, the model risk is intensely mitigated before usage, and when the changes are happening, much less mitigation effort is done during development. Then the next thing is the roles and the responsibilities. They have to be well defined and well understood. Developers, data scientists, independent testers and validators, and IT deploying and maintaining the AI play various roles in risk governance. Now, there's many risks mentioned in the previous section, and these four pillars require a good toolkit in order to ensure that consistency, enablement, and evolution take place. Now, I put a slide about principles and mainly to leave it with you. I want to mention that compared to many other areas, analytical areas, principles must exist. And we've seen significant concerns about fairness and bias, accountability, transparency, and ethical usage. Similar principles were expressed by regulators in draft guidances and speeches. These types of principles are acknowledged globally. Many seem common sense, some are newly explicitly formulated, such as transparency. Ethics is not new, but not yet applied to machines or algorithms. As long as AI could self-learn and have a will of their own, we have to worry about ethics too. In general, these principles have to resonate with your organization, has to align with your culture. While most of us would agree with the principles, demonstrating adherence to them is not obvious. And thus, setting expectation of what one needs to do to exemplify adherence to the principle is the next step in the risk governance build-up. This principle also need to be linked to and thought through the risk that AI pose. Now, let's make this more real. So we had the four buckets and we said we need toolkits for them. So I'll go through some of them and see if there is any learnings, anything you can move forward into the implementation with. So when you look at the principles, first, fairness definitions must be set. Bias is fairly complex. It is clear one should not use discriminatory variables such as race, religion, ethnicity, and so on. What about age and gender? In mortality tables if you are in insurance. Then predictors that are highly correlated with such groups should be avoided. Is it possible to make that assessment always? In any case, you would need a framework that defines all those situations and what to do about. Then the transparency. Transparency is a trade-off, always. Powerful algorithms are used, must be used, when they are better than simpler traditional models. But they come at a price. The price is transparency. And transparency is not only between the organization and its clients, but also within the organization, between the business owner, data scientists, IT, and risk. Some examples would be that financial institutions explain how their data, the client's data, will be used within an AI. But also internally, users of models should be informed about the quality of the AI output, including estimates of main sources of bias or other potential errors. Now, models in use should be reproducible, meaning by applying the same logic data and environment, you should be able to replicate the results. Now, that becomes more difficult. So you will need high quality documentation, version control, of course, be able to produce a clear audit trail on how decisions are made. Model cards are a new concept and are a way to assess AI models to ensure there is no bias, to show interpretability of results and certain transparency without fully understanding the AI engine. So that's why this tool is so great. Now, For applying a risk-based approach, a comprehensive risk identification, drivers of those risks, and a quantification metrics in the context of the usage of AI must be developed and deployed. That will be a framework that has to be tested and monitored as the AI universe evolves, with the risk identification measurements as close as possible to the first line, and with a risk management oversight. When it comes to life cycle, the biggest fear or the biggest risk is that we roll something in production that's inadequate. It doesn't reach business objectives and attaches additional unwanted issues such as reputational exposure. So efforts must be put to mitigate those upfront. When in use, we are vigilant. We monitor the performance, and that performance program has to be really good. Has to focus on the metrics that matter. Has to have a timely way to identify deterioration and trigger investigation or replacement. Change management becomes equally important because sometimes changes seem minor, such as we are just retraining these models. However, data feeds may not be properly configured. We may include new data points, client data points, which require a different, more stringent privacy rule. And other cases could be that the output type changes. It's not a percentage, but it's a table. And that output used down the stream in another tool may not be adequate or needs to be reset. So there are many risks when changes are made, and a good change management framework has to be in place. And when we retire AI, we have to make sure that we don't leave parts of it in the system. We have to remove all the components, not to have a piece of code that reads some text somewhere and feeds into another code that stayed in the system, and we know that's no longer adequate or needed. Nothing can be done without expertise and will. The tone from the top is a two-way street. The management is accountable, but also needs to be provided sufficient information so they have a good understanding what can go wrong and what remedies are necessary. Continuous training of all involved, such as developers, testers, and business, is crucial as the adoption continues. Now, how one can increase the chances of success. So the keywords are here: proactive, agile, collaborative. And I'll try to explain what I mean by that. The traditional focus of the model risk management was on the implementation and usage. So we would look at implementation errors, system speed, shortage of skills, inadequate design. We'd look through the validation. And we would look to have a monitoring program that detects poor performance. In any of these cases, speed or change in the output was not a big concern. The output was fairly stable. Now, for each of these cases, we found for model risk mitigants for many years is a mature space. Now, to be able to keep up with the enhanced risk that AI brings us, we'll have to start risk mitigation earlier. That is in the model development stage. And that is to ensure that only appropriate data is used or explored, that any other potential non-compliance related to the data access for modeling is avoided, and to assess bias and model stability or instability, and what drives its deterioration is done upfront. We can go further in the upstream, in the concept stage, to ensure that only ethical usages or purposes are considered for development, and there is sufficient learning loop. In essence, we need to find a way to bring the due diligence in the first line. That will help us to increase the efficiencies, because only what's worth taking the risk is going to be developed and later adopted, and the governance effort down the stream will be lower. The critics might say that will slow down the development process, the idea creation, the exploratory work. Well, does it? My answer is no. No, if we adopt an agile approach, and that is that the waterfall approach for the model development does not work anymore. One cannot wait till the end of the development to assess data privacy or bias, or if the AI model works as intended. These activities have to be embedded from the very beginning in the thinking process, in the development. The system where AI application would be deployed is not an afterthought, must be identified from the very early stages of design and assessed to understand if it's adequate, if it poses increased security risks. And that thinking requires many skills, people, and functions at the table. The other thing that I recommend is that the first line adopts platforms that allow a number of things to be done within one platform: development, testing, monitoring, independent assessment, if possible. That will bring the governance within the ecosystem, will increase communication, transparency, and efficiency between these teams. Data will be there, the code is there, hyperparameters are there, and so on. All available and apparent to business owners, data scientists, validators, and testers. So now, some things to take away. For the risk governance program to be well-rounded, you will need the 6 elements. Understand the type of risk, get the life cycle right, ask the right question. So the life cycle is path dependent. Every stage has to be correct and apply sufficient due diligence without exposing us to undue risk. That's why I recommend incremental due diligence at each sub-stage and awareness of the risk and potential consequences. Think of the risk from day one when you want to buy, adopt, acquire, build an AI. Third is keep independent review and enhanced monitoring. These 2 items are the key risk mitigants: independent review, enhanced monitoring. That will enable us to pull the plug when needed, timely, or to explain results when they don't look right. Third-party tools apply the same due diligence. We need to understand what due diligence our third-party partners applied when building and testing, how they can be adequately monitored, who takes responsibility if something goes wrong, and we need to have a backup plan if all fails. Then keep the accountabilities clear and known. You should keep the accountabilities responsibility with the owner of the tool, and that is the business that needs and uses the tool for their business. If I bought a car, I own it, so I must obey certain rules. So that's absolutely the same. Owners delegate the tasks to developers or to IT, but they own the accountability. On the other hand, those that get the task, developers, testers, IT, they have to execute according to expected standards and rules. They have accountability for providing that adequate service. And lastly, decisions cannot be made in isolation anymore. Key stakeholders must be at the table, and an approval committee or forum has to be set up. And the last thought I want to leave with you is that for the risk governance program to be successful, a community of practice supported by various stakeholders and having regular channels of interaction has to exist. Given the spread of AI models across the organization must adopt a persistent, enterprise-wide effort where this community of practice is the conduit, is at the center of it all. Thank you.